Here we are again. Good morning, Josh. How are you doing?
Jens, good to be back. And it's interesting that you said good morning. It does feel like you may be venturing a bit more into the Web3 world with a greeting like that.
Yeah. No, it is still morning. It's 11. At least this time.
Yeah, no, I just had to chirp because I know that we've had a lot of discussions about what's happening in the crypto space at the moment and what this may mean for the future and the way that people interact and things like that. But it's good to be back on another Reverse Mentorship Friday and look forward to discussing some of the things that we've got lined up today.
Yeah, looking forward to. And it's the first time that we are live on LinkedIn on our Reverse Mentor Lab profile because we got approved finally, which is awesome. So we reached two
It's
people more. Well, let's see.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was listening to a podcast this morning, and they were talking about the length of time that it needs to almost integrate into different people's thinking and almost have a continuous presence. And I think that there is a big thing of showing up. So it's great to hear that we're live on LinkedIn, but it's also we've been doing this Reverse Mentorship Friday for a bit of time now, and it's been interesting to see the growth in our own thinking and the way that we're connecting different things amongst ourselves, but also in terms of what that is inspiring in terms of some of the other things that are happening in the ecosystem that we've got on the go at the moment.
Yeah, I think we crossed the 6 month mark with Reverse Mentorship Friday, which is awesome. And one thing what I learned with podcasting is literally it's a long term game. It's not, hey, we're going live now and we're assuming that 200 people, 5,000 people, 100,000, whatever million people are listening. Is it doesn't matter in the moment. For us, it's more the longevity and the opportunities we use this messages we're shooting out and finding the voice, which is the topic of today, is literally fitting into that as well. Because in the end, if you consistently doing that, it's awesome. I was also listening to a podcast this morning from Rich Roll, which I like very much, and I follow him since years. Who is also a fellow athlete and working with environmental topics, and he was interviewing a guy who was swimming across the Antarctic and this kind of things, like super crazy. And with the focus, of course, on COP 21, where they talked about how important it is and that the ice is melting and so on. And he was mentioning that he has quite a big following now, but he has started like everyone is starting with zero. And the fun thing is he just recorded episode number 600 something. So if we're, I think it's episode 43 on this podcast at least. So we are still a way to go to get to 600 and hopefully making an impact like he is doing, because he's as well having a bigger cause than, hey, I'm doing a podcast like we have. And I think that's the important things in life. It's not about, hey, how many people are watching right now or listening to it. In the end, it's really about how do we utilize the two people who are listening and how do we bring them into, and maybe just inspired to do something different than they would normally do. So we will figure it out.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about. And, obviously one of the last conversations that we recorded on the podcast, which I don't think is live yet, but it spoke about sort of our journey over the last 12 months and what we've learned and what we've experimented and how we've both grown and benefited from these sessions, but also from some of the other interactions that we've had. And last night I was in a sort of a lecture inside of this learning DAO. And for those who don't know what a DAO is a decentralized autonomous organization. And I'm not going to go into those details in terms of how I came about landing up in that community, but the discussion was around a person who's now become what many would refer to as one of the leading thinkers and writers inside of the crypto space at the moment. And his journey started a year ago, where he was writing for little under 1,000 people. And now he's got an email subscriber list of close to 100,000 people. And he spoke about his very sort of methodical but also structured way around how he tested certain things out, which obviously inside of the innovation space, Jens, which you're really passionate about, you do on an ongoing basis. And we've had discussions about that. But it was more around what does it mean to do things with intention, and also to look at doing things with your own voice. And there's this concept of a personal monopoly, which talks to around how you grow your personal monopoly and what does that mean in terms of how you go about establishing that. And I'll share some links probably in the show notes, because it will derail this conversation if I go on talking about personal monopolies, but it does link into finding your own voice and also connecting with your own voice to allow you to connect across different generations.
Yeah. And for everyone who is watching live or listening later or watching later, today's topic is really about find your voice to engage across generations. And finding your voice is a topic I've been deep into over the last year. And as well, due to the conversations, which is now plus 170 podcasts I have recorded together with you and alone, um, I've had several people who have had big changes in their life where they said, I needed to find myself in a different way. I needed to figure out who I am again. And sometimes it's like you think it's midlife crisis, like, yeah, the people over 40. And yes, that's part of it. But it's also young people who are saying, like, yeah, I don't know what my place is in this life, in this world. And I'm not sure what impact I want to create in this world. So for me, this finding your voice is really about, if we go at least into my understanding of it, it's like being authentically yourself, like you mentioned with the person you have listened to yesterday. It's really about being truly yourself and not playing a role, understanding who you are and understanding what you want to do with intent, and doing that over a long period of time if you have found it, because it gives you energy. And it's most of the time it's selfless. It's not about, hey, how can I do more business, how can I get a better grade in school, how can I get a pay rise in my job. It's more about how can I do something bigger than myself. And I think the pandemic has all brought us into situations where it's not about us, where we understand, hey, the world is different and we're in different situations, and maybe we find out ways of how can we do bigger things together, which is a big passion of ours, of course.
Yeah, it's fascinating, Jens, and I think the word you've already mentioned it around intention, and it's something that I was also thinking about when you came up with the topic for today. And I was thinking about what does it mean to do things with intention, and I sort of started thinking and saying to myself, you can do things with intention, but does that necessarily mean that you should be doing that thing? So
Yeah.
if I think about a practical example is, you could be asked to do a specific task or design something in a specific way, and you'll go about doing that with intention because you're going to go about doing things professionally or in a professional manner. And then I thought about, okay, well, what does it mean to do things with curiosity? And I thought, how can you think about doing things with intention, but at its heart, you're doing them because you are curious? And if you're doing things because you are curious, there's a higher chance that you're then going to become more invested inside of that. And you're actually going to drive yourself to find your voice, but also contribute in a completely different way than you may have contributed previously if you were just doing things with intent. And
Mhm.
the reason I sort of bundle those two together is because I think that inside of finding your own voice, you have to be curious about going on that journey. It's not something that's necessarily easy, and it's not something that happens overnight. And for example, if you think about our own journeys in terms of the things that we've done through our career so far, mine relatively young, yours relatively experienced, but definitely still got a lot to go in terms of what you want to do and what you are going to achieve in the world. It's how has that curiosity shaped that? And what I
Mhm.
mean by that is when you started out and where you are now, what has changed and what led you to make those changes along your journey? And I think that if you go about engaging things with at its heart, being curious about what you're engaging with, whether that's how you're listening, how you're showing up in different environments, how you're pushing yourself into uncomfortable situations where you can learn at a far higher rate than if you didn't push yourself into those things. I think that for me, when I start thinking about finding my voice, I think it's curiosity's got a huge role to play.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I mean, maybe we go deeper into how people can do that, giving a couple of examples how we did it and what we think about it. And then we go a little bit into why why we think it's important, which we have scratched already, but mainly focus then on the generational exchange. So from a how you can find your voice is, for me, the most interesting part is going into a space where it's getting boring. It's like if you sit down in in your living room, you don't you switch off your mobile phone and you're just in silence. And the best case, you do that over a longer period of time, not just an hour. It's really about taking time for yourself, taking time to think deeply. And we have discussed that previously as well. Like taking time with yourself and for yourself. And everyone is doing that differently. For example, I'm going running like I did this morning for more than an hour to have time with myself, because I utilize that time to think and figure out what it is, what is important to me, and so on. But it's really about, one thing is deep thinking. The other thing is, for me, is asking yourself deeper questions. Um, what legacy do you want to leave when you're leaving the earth? Um, what do you want that your grandchildren in the future uh, will discuss with you? So it's not about, yeah, how can I make a huge career right now? How can I earn more money right now? Um, how do I get a new client? It's more about, it's like, what is your purpose? And some people need help with that, where they need a coach or a mentor, which is always an opportunity engaging with other people. And some people are well on doing that themselves. And then turning that into action, I think, is a key part. And I'm an advocate of action and validation of assumptions, which is all about an innovation. So what I did for myself is taking time and thinking, and then putting myself out there to find it out if that's the right thing for me. um, and then as well, being open to yourself, saying, hey, it's not the right thing, but it was a good learning, let's try something else. Because we're often putting ourselves into silos where we say, hey, I'm all about this and I can only be all about that, I can't do anything anymore. I've started career path as a lawyer, and now I'm a trained lawyer. I've worked 15 years in that profession. I can't do anything else anymore, though that I would love to do something else. Maybe I want to be a professional swimmer or whatever. And I think that these are the topics where, when you grow up, um, some people getting into that, and that's why, maybe why it's midlife crisis, where you're like over 40, you have achieved all of what you have set to yourself, like you're the successful lawyer, and then you figure out, yeah, it's not really the energy anymore. It was a dream in the beginning, but it's not really what makes me happy today. And I think
Mhm.
that's part of finding your own voice, which is also means, for me at least, articulating that, being able to speak about that, either to yourself or in public or to your family and friends. So
Mm.
that's at least my first step onto how you can do that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so before I answer that, I think just to tie in a great quote sort of from a well-known philosopher, he says, all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. Blaise Pascal. And if you think about what that means in terms of how we deal with chaos or how we deal in reaction to things, sometimes we always need to think that, or we tend to think rather, we have to go and do something. But what does that mean to potentially sit in a room alone, get bored, and actually just process your thoughts? You know, meditate on them, actually slow things down and slow your thinking down so that you can process and think through what has actually happened. Maybe that is a big part in terms of allowing us and allowing people to find their voices. And I think yesterday we were in a fascinating conversation with someone who really, Sarah Westbrook, who does a lot of work around emotions and what does it mean to have emotions and be conscious of those emotions and almost front load your emotions in terms of understanding. And in that conversation, one of the things that popped into my head and thinking about this conversation today was this concept of what does it mean to think through our emotions and be far more aware of them than we are currently? And how does that then shift the way that you interact with people? And does that mean that we actually start thinking differently in terms of what we're paying attention to? And the short answer is yes, because it means that you're more aware and using different parts of your brain without going on that rabbit hole, I'm going to pull us back out again. I'm going to say there's a great quote that Jeff Parks has, where he says that purpose will inform the process. And if you think about this quote, and what he means by that is he's really saying your purpose, so in finding your voice, will then help you inform the process. So by taking a step back, by giving yourself time to think through things, that can allow you to find your voice. And in finding your voice, that will then allow you to inform the process that you need to take, or the steps that you need to take to then drive that action or discover new things. So on a more personal note, and that's a very long-winded or long beginning to a short answer that I should have given, was really around pushing myself to be more aware of who I am as an individual. And that inside of today's world is sometimes challenging, because we've always got things that want our attention or things to compare ourselves to. And it took me a long time to think through this and what it actually means to find your own voice, but also to be yourself. And a lot of people may say, why did it take you so long? And the short answer is that is because you needed some time to discover it. And inside of discovering yourself, you also need to give yourself time to process that. So, for example, I used to ride a bicycle a lot. And when I say a lot, I used to train for 16 hours a week. And one of the things that I realized inside of that was that there was actually something deeper down that I was potentially running from and wasn't actually leaning into and asking myself why I was going and doing things on the extreme. And if you think about just that simple recognition, I'd given myself time to process that, but it also took me 2 years to realize that. And there are quicker ways to do that. Believe you me, you don't have to go and take 2 years to find your voice or figure yourself out. But it's all about that process and realizing that life is a journey. It's not something that happens overnight. And I think that what's going on in the world at the moment, specifically around crypto, again, is that a lot of people think that it's be all and end all. There's a huge amount of FOMO. And I think that when we think into FOMO and we don't turn off our FOMO notifications, we actually get confused and don't allow ourselves time to find our voice, because we always feel like we're playing catch up. But actually, humans by nature are incredibly good problem solvers. And if we give our time to solve problems, we'll actually be amazed with what we can do with our thinking, and then learning from others and creating some cool impact with what we can do in this world.
Yeah, and adding to that is, I mean, we, like you said, we're now in a world where it's time that every one of us is stepping up. We have seen that COP21 was a success, but not the success a lot of people have imagined. Politically, maybe it was a success, but I think it's not about, hey, what's happening in 10, 15 years. What's happening now needs to happen. What are we doing right now to save our planet? And not how can we secure our borders? How can we secure our economy in a specific country for a specific reason because I'm elected to run this country? I think every one of us has the power and has the possibility to do things. And it starts small, but it's really about, like you said, it's about what is your purpose in life. And if you have found your purpose, then um how do you do that in a way that it's helping to do bigger things, and maybe as well finding people who are connected to you and who are willing to do similar things, who are willing to chip in and say, hey, that sounds interesting, I like your purpose, I like what you say, how about we do things together? And then this togetherness can grow a community around different topics, and the community is able to impact more people, and more people can impact more things. And I think that's really it's just the effect of it. If you are putting yourself out there, like I have done for the last year, I have never been as public as the last year, on social media and so on, with my own thinking, what I believe, because I was always representing a big brand or a big company. So I wasn't um, feeling that I can do that or I should even do that. But now I see that, at least for myself, in my small circle, the messages are resonating with specific people, and specific people are interested and have same dreams and desires, and that brings people together, and together we look into how can we utilize that. And
Mm-hmm.
then it's if we now go towards the generational exchanges, that's this learning thing, the learning opportunity, if we call it. It's like, hey, there are people who have different experiences. And I was talking yesterday um, to Bishoy, who is grown up in Egypt, and he talked about how different it is when you grew up in different places in the world. So he has grown up in Egypt, um, and is now living in France. And he was mentioning, it's like it's completely different if you grow up like I did in Egypt with a big supportive family, or you're in a poorer area in Egypt, same country, um, or if you're a female, it's huge, vastly different. If you then compare that how I grew up in Germany, it's not too different. Like my buddies, for example, they all grew up similar. Females have almost the same change opportunities, at least in this society in Germany. So having this understanding of the world has completely different perspectives for you, and then as well gives you different passions, gives you different dreams of what you want to change in the world. And I think the collaboration opportunity we have, specifically what, like you mentioned, with the Web3 in the future or already today, and the digital possibilities, are huge opportunities for us to say, hey, how can we help each other? One thing is finding your own voice, standing for something, but then as well bringing that to action, not just talking. Because we're in, at least for my personal, maybe because I have all today my provocateur head. It's like we have talked enough. The whole world has talked enough, and politics are just talking to show up. It's not about how do we change things in the world. So I'm really about how can we drive action? How can we take things forward? And I know that talking needs to happen, and agreement and arguing, but it's really about how do we drive action in the future. And that's what I stand for, that what I want to create. And I believe that's also what we can use this channel for, as one of the many channels to get things moving.
Hmm. Yeah, so just to double back on a few things there, Jens. So I think some people, when they hear finding your voice, they may think that that means that you need to be confident, or you need to have a public profile in order to talk or in order to show up. And I think that definition is maybe seated quite heavily in terms of this social media age that we've come
Mm.
from, in terms of people profiling themselves and the influencers of the world who sort of move movements and things like that. And I think there is an element of that in terms of finding your voice and developing confidence, but it's also around finding out what you're genuinely curious about. And what does that mean when you find what you're genuinely curious about, and you've given yourself that space to explore it, or that space to discover it? And then you can go out, which I'm really excited about, in terms of, I think we've had opportunities like this before to meet other people who also have that intense curiosity or the intense fascination with that thing that you are really fascinated about. That for me is being enhanced by this internet age that we are now gravitating towards. And yes, it's been accelerated by COVID, but I think it's been there before. We're just breaking down global borders now. We're breaking down more boundaries than we've previously been able to do. And so I think when you hear find your own voice, don't confuse it with around having to be loud and out there and almost brash in the way that you operate. Think about it in terms of what does it mean to be comfortable with yourself, to actually engage on that specific level that you have a deep curiosity with, and going about finding others inside of this space, inside of this world, where you can go and connect with them on that level. And I think for me, that really comes around to why it's so important, and why people do need to find their own voice, and why people do need to be comfortable with themselves, is because if we can do that, we then open up ourselves to learning from others. And I think one big thing that you mentioned is around this notion of impact and this notion of taking action. And I think in order to do that, in order to drive forward, and in order to create actions, we need to learn from as many different viewpoints as possible. And I think that sometimes when we think in action mode, we just go, go, go. And at times that's great and that's right. but there are also complex things inside of society and inside of culture that we need to pay attention to, and we need to be asking far more deeper questions about how does that impact the way that people are able to act. How does that impact people or give people the ability to find their voice, because sometimes their voices are constrained because of the societies that they've been brought up in. And I think all of these nuances and all of these things is we need to be far more aware of it. We need to engage more broadly with the people that we have these discussions with. And yes, we need action, but we also need open and honest discussions. Because I think too often is that we don't engage in open and honest discussions, which means that people then are constrained by this very world that we live in, because they don't have that opportunity to find themselves.
Yeah, agree. And for me, I'm 100% as well with the public part of it. It's not necessary at all. It's more about you in yourself. If you understand what you want to do, you drive your personal actions in a completely different way than if you don't. If you just follow something, um,
Mm,
and then the action, I agree as well. Often sounds when I when I talk about getting into action straight away that there's no strategic part of it. For me, it's really about understanding your purpose and then looking into how can you get towards that with creating impact on the way, creating impact in the best possible way and in the smallest possible way. It's not about doing always big things. It's like you work in an organization, you know what you want to do, you're passionate about sustainability, you're passionate about whatever, that you drive things in an organization just by what you're doing. It's not about that you need to do a big fuss out of everything. It's more about, hey, you have the possibility to impact the people who are around you just by being a good example. And if every one of us is doing that in the small scale, we create something bigger. And that's really for me a key part, specifically if we now go into the corporate setting where we have the possibility to work with different generations under one roof or in one corporation, where you have the possibility to learn from people who are, let's say, plus 60 or 50, where they have as well the possibility to learn from people who are 16, 17. Not everyone has kids and learns from the kids, but
mm,
there's huge opportunity in just starting this engagement. And then if you just truly understand what you believe in, what your voice is, then you have different discussions. Then it's not just surface. Then it's like, hey, I don't agree in what you're saying because I believe this and this and this. You have a different discussion if you stand up for your opinion, even on a one-on-one. It don't need to be public at all. It's more about um, being open and honest and not just saying yes the whole time.
mm,
And it's not about, hey, I'm now the maverick and I push you. It's more about, hey, let's have a true conversation of how do we, if we take environmental topics, how do we save the climate crisis? How do we solve that? And there are a couple of scientific um, possibilities we all have, but there are as well very, very small things every one of us can do. And if you have a
mm.
conversation around that because you believe in it, then it's a completely different outcome than if you don't know what you're studying for. And that's why for me it's super super important that everyone is able to do that, because if we just take my example, I have been part of large corporations and I wasn't doing it. So I today I can't say that I completely regret it, but I would love to have stand up earlier for my topics and said, "Hey, I don't agree with that. I might have had a different career because of that, but that's another story."
Yeah, well, I think that's an interesting point, Jens, and it's sort of where I was going to pull on the thread there was around giving people the opportunity to find their voice inside big organizations, and why I think it's so important, or why we think it's so important, rather, is it's also about allowing that diversity of thought to develop organically and allow people to go on a discovery journey inside of that organization. Because I think what's going to happen if people don't allow that to happen is that they're going to lose some of the top individuals, some of the top minds inside of those
Yeah.
organizations, because people are going to very quickly start moving with their feet. And inside of moving with their feet, they are going to go and work for an organization, for themselves, or for DAOs that allow them to go on that discovery journey. And it's almost like saying is we need to be hyper aware and conscious of people have their own voice. So what does that mean if I listen to Jens and I listen to Jens's opinion because he's coming from this generation or because he's coming from this background? And how can that inform and also help me to shape my view, my worldviews that I have, rather than going into a reactionary state, which I think a few people do when they hear allowing people to find their own voice. They just think of conflict and sort of challenges and things that might come up. And that's not what we're saying. We're saying in terms of how can you think about this differently, where you benefit from the diversity, you benefit from the different points of views. And inside of that, you can make your organization far more sustainable and far stronger in terms of allowing people with different viewpoints, with their own voices, to come in and build that space together. And I think that when you think about the future and what that may hold in terms of allowing generations to interact with one another, it's around the leaders of today giving the opportunity to the leaders of tomorrow to help them find their voice. Because if you think about this generational exchange that we're very passionate about, it's this concept of bringing different generations together to learn with and from one another. And how do you go about doing that? One of those things is allowing people to share their own viewpoints and also to talk about some of the things that they might feel frustrated with different generations inside of a business, for example.
Yeah. I would add to that as well for the experienced people. I mean, if you take myself, I would say I'm still on my way, and I think I'm always on my way, like a lot of people are. But it's also that not everyone, let's say, if we just take a timeline plus 40, knows exactly what they want to achieve in life. And I don't say, hey, I want to retire when I'm 67, at least in Germany. That's my goal. I think that's not the goal. That's just, yeah, I'm following the footsteps of everyone who has been before. For me, it's more about what impact, what legacy do you want to create? And I think a lot of people are not aware of their drivers. Like what are deep drivers for them? And if they would, and we have had that conversation, if they would get a salary that they can afford everything they want in their life, it's like, let's say, maybe not want what they need. They have a roof uh, over their heads, the family has food, they can go on holiday maybe once or twice a year, like really having a good life. If everyone would have that automatically on their bank account every month, would they still go to work in their work where they're right now? Or would they say, no, I would pursue something completely different because I believe that's more impactful, or I get more energy out of that? And that's really, I think a lot of people are not in that space. And I mean, I at least for the two of us, we're fortunate that we're kind of exploring it at least. But
Yeah, super fortunate, and it also, these types of discussions do make me put my feet on the ground and say there's still a lot of work to be done, and
yeah,
nothing worth doing is ever easy. And that's a sort of an overused and a very maybe cliche quote to sort of reference in a discussion like this. But I think that in terms of what we hope the people, the world, and the future will do for us, is that we will all be able to find and enable people to find their voice, whether that be an experienced thinker inside of a big organization allowing younger generations to find their own voice, or whether you are an experienced thinker and you're going on this journey of finding your own voice, and now you're potentially more aware of it from what's happened with COVID. And I think that there's all of this flux that's happening at the moment, and the world is always fluid. And I think Jens and I are going through this sort of change moment at this point in time, where a lot of people think about change as being fixed. So you move from A to B. But what does it mean when you think about change as being fluid? And you think about how can you harness this chaos, if we use that term, and you think about what are some of the gems and what are some of the learnings that can come from this period of chaos, where we're still trying to figure everything out. We're still trying to build together. We're still trying to really understand humanity at its deep and its core. And I think a lot of those answers do lie in terms of understanding culture, understanding society, and not only approaching things from an economic standpoint. Because I think sometimes when we think about business, when we think about life, is we sometimes, put a business lens or business model lens on it and saying, how can we do this to financially or create a revenue out of it? And I think if we take a step back and we say deep down, what are some of the shifts that are happening and why are they happening? It's because people are at the core. And if we think about that from many of the discussions that we've had, how do we go about better understanding people to allow them to do their best work, but also to allow them to contribute in a more open and honest way than they previously have been before, perhaps?
Yeah. Yeah. So important. And for me, it always starts with yourself. I mean, this finding your voice is one thing, is like we said, is asking the questions to yourself. But then that also for me means like you have the possibility to listen, to understand, and like we sometimes say, connect the dots, which means take different insights from different people when you start to truly listen and try to understand where they come from. How did they grow up? How what culture did they grow up in, and why are they saying certain things? Because sometimes the message itself is not understandable for someone who is coming from a different culture, because you don't know where they come from. But if you try to understand and ask people the question, specifically in a personal environment, hey, how did you come to that conclusion? I don't get it. And it's not
Mm,
about confronting other people. It's more about truly listening and trying to understand, why does that person saying this? And then
mm,
taking your own decision based on all the different insights you have and based on your beliefs and your passion. And it's like, if we take your voice into that, like where you want to be, what legacy you want to create.
mm.
But it's really starting with listening.
Yeah, I love that, Jens. So I think in terms of just looking to wrap up today's Reverse Mental Lab Friday session, saying, putting ourselves on the spot, saying, maybe if we can take one thing or one sentence away from what we've discussed today or what we've learned over the last year, that's helped us as individuals to find our voice, but also something maybe that we hope society can gain from finding their own voice.
Yeah, if I start, for me, it's silence, like I mentioned before, taking time for yourself. And this is still one of the biggest weaknesses I have, because I'm just busy in a way that I'm always trying to drive things, and I'm always trying to help other people, which I got from my parents early on. So that's one of my things I'm doing all day. And sometimes I'm missing the time for myself. And taking that time is so huge if you really start doing that. So that's for me really the key. And then
Mm,
having interesting conversation and exposing yourself into environments that are not usual for you, like attending a Zoom call, attending a webinar. If you look into digital, joining digital groups, discords, servers, communities who are thinking different, um, and exposing yourself. And the same in the physical environment, depending where you are in the world and how much the pandemic is like not allowing you to go into physical conversations. But it's like, if we just take our conversations we have had over the last year, it's they have shaped both of us. And I think, at least in my case, I can only speak for myself, not to the worse. So just do it and figure it out, and maybe find a coach, find a mentor who is willing to help you, like we
mm.
have started as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's maybe before I sort of share my takeaway, just to riff on what Jens mentioned there quickly, is if you're looking for a mentor, if you'd like to be a mentor, if you'd like to connect with others who have this fascination with mentorship, and by mentorship we mean a bi-directional relationship. So that's the very name of this podcast, is the Reverse Mentor Lab. It's around how do generations learn from one another in a bi-directional manner. So we've got a Discord server. We'll share the link in the show notes, but there's also a call to action inside of that server for the different mentors that are looking for one another. So if you've got an inkling for to become a mentor, please join that server and come and meet the community. But from my side, Jens, is just to wrap up, is one of the things that I really think about in terms of finding your own voice is this concept of how easy it is to share our thoughts without giving thought to what we are sharing. And I'll use the example of Twitter to illustrate this. So Twitter, thank goodness, has not allowed us to edit our tweets, because it's one of the very few social media platforms that actually means you need to think through things before you go about tweeting. And Navarro Ravikant says that he uses Twitter to make sure that he's thinking through things in the way that he's going about communicating them. So I
Mm.
think it's one thing to say yes to finding your own voice, yes to discovering things with curiosity, and yes to leaning into that journey and notion of discovery, but think through about what you are saying, where you are saying it, and how you are saying it. Because sometimes in this age of social media, we can say things that we maybe wish we could retract very quickly, but we can't. And also take the time to process your thoughts before you think about finding your voice. So, Jens, thanks again for our conversation today. Thanks again for the learnings that I've definitely gained from just this quick 45-minute chat. But really enjoy these sessions, and hopefully we'll see each other in person one day soon. But until then,
Yeah,
we'll
we
have to
work
keep
on that.
conversing in this way.
Yeah. And for everyone interested, I just posted the link, which should at least went into Facebook and YouTube. So if you're interested in looking for a mentor, there's a channel inside of that Discord community where you can find a mentor, or you just post, "Hey, I'm looking for a mentor." For example, if we just take an example, Nijat, one of the community members, has reached out to me to be mentored by myself. So I agreed to mentor him in 2022, and we already started last week. So that was a quick connection, and I think in the normal world we would have never found us. So that there are opportunities, and there are amazing people in that community, and I hope at least it's growing. At least it we're still early on with that community, but I think it's growing over time. And as more people join, as more people are willing to as well mentor or get mentored, as more exciting it gets. Awesome. We made it today.
We made it. We
Thanks,
made it with the
Josh.
connection. Thanks, Jens.
Yes.
Appreciate it. We'll chat soon.
Yes. Okay, everyone. See you next Friday. Check out the Reverse Mental Lab podcast. It's on all platforms. It's so everything you see literally in this video, we have 43 episodes already. Not all of them are public yet, but we have a couple of more episodes. So have a look at the YouTube channel. Have a look at Apple Podcast, Spotify podcast, wherever you listening to podcasts, you will find us. Thank you very much, and see you next Friday.